Okay, this is the last class before the break, and I'm trying to close out our discussion of the Greeks, looking forward to turning to Roman history. We're going to do a review question first, but also Maria has asked me to say something about the upcoming essay, and I think that's something I should do. So the first essay, as I explained at the beginning of the term, is a study in the sources. Historians base their narratives on sources closest to the particular events or circumstances that they're describing. And what you have here on this website are these two trials, which I said are the two most important trials in the ancient world, Socrates and Jesus. And the site assembles the most reliable sources. So in writing an essay about this, you more or less get a sense of the way historians construct narratives, the way they develop their narratives. That's amongst other aspects. This is one of the basic rationales for giving you this type of essay. Now, just to carry on with that, what I asked for is in both of these essays that you briefly describe the circumstances, the dates, the places, the occasion for these trials. Why did they occur? And why do historians think they're important events? Well, obviously, the answer to that is Socrates is considered the founder of rational philosophy, and Jesus is the founder of Christianity. So clearly, that's the answer to that. Then so that's the first part of the essay. The second part is for you to sort of, first of all, examine the sources with respect to the trial of Socrates and evaluate what were the charges, insofar as you can make them out. What were the charges against Socrates? Likewise, based on your reading of the Gospels and also the Roman account, what were the charges against Jesus? And then I ask you to sort of evaluate the sources. How reliable are the Greek writers who wrote about the trial of Socrates, and how reliable are the accounts given by the Gospels? And then, of course, you just sum up your work at the end. That's the end of it. So are there any further questions about this?
Yes, could you give us the name of the website once more? I think I've forgotten it.
It's called Great Trials in History. I'm just looking for it. Could anybody, I'm looking through I can't remember the guy's name. Oh, Linder. If you look, if you Google Douglas Linder, famous trials, that's the name of the website.
Sorry, I just want to mention that the link is mentioned in UMlearn in the syllabus. So there, the link is there.
Yes, if anybody else, please intervene at this point and let's discuss this a little bit more.
Question.
Okay,
I have a question.
good. Well, we're all set about that. Now I want to turn to the review question, the 12th review question. Remember, the test comes online on UmLearn. You'll see it there under content on the 22nd at noontime. I'm posting the exam. And if during the break you have further questions about any of this, get in touch. I'm certainly not going to the Caribbean at this point. I'm here, and so you can get in touch with me at any time during the break. So the 12th and last review question we're considering is compare the religion of the Greeks with the religion of the Hebrews. And I would say that we can say the Hebrews, Jews. Okay. First of all, in terms of comparison, number one, in the end, both the Greek religion and the Hebrew Jewish religion were temple religions. Every city-state had its temple, and in that temple was the chief god of the city, and so that was true of the Greeks. But it was also true of the Hebrews, because while it started out as a kind of tribal religion, by the time of Solomon, Jehovah had been installed in a temple in Jerusalem. And the Jewish religion, it had other aspects of it, obviously, but fundamental to it was the temple. It was thought necessary for Jews to visit Jerusalem and the temple as part of their religious obligation. Secondly, both religions, both the Greek and the Hebrew Jewish religion, were based on a sacred or venerated books. And notice, so on the one hand, it's the Bible for the Hebrew Jews, and it's the Iliad and the Odyssey by Homer for the Greeks. And notice that unlike in the Bronze Age, where nobody can read, a certain fraction of the population in both Greece and in Palestine, not everybody, but a significant proportion of people know how to read. Thirdly, as I noted, the Hebrew Jewish religion evolves toward monotheism. At the beginning, Jehovah is simply the God of the Hebrews, and the Hebrews, they realize that other people have different gods. But by the time of the prophets, and the prophets, especially Isaiah, are crucial, they come to the conclusion that their God is a universal God. There is only one God, and that he makes ethical demands on the Hebrews, but also on other people as well. So they're monotheists. In contrast, the Greeks are polytheists. They believe in many gods. Furthermore, developing this, the Greek gods have a human form. They're anthropomorphic, human form. They have a human form, and they behave like gigantic human beings. They have their weaknesses, their foibles, their particular desires and characteristics. Whereas the Hebrew and Jewish God is invisible and wholly other. It's considered to be a profanation amongst the Jews to have any graven image of God. God is beyond human understanding. So there is that difference. And I would say, on the other hand, we can say that the Greeks had even the idea that not only were the gods like humans, but humans, particularly heroic human beings, could become godlike. They had this idea that heroes, particularly in war, could ascend to the level of the gods. I wouldn't say there was some sense of an afterlife, but neither the Greeks nor the Hebrews developed a deep sense of an afterlife. Now, the last thing one could note is that in addition to their temple religions, the Greeks also had oracles and mystery religions. And finally, while the Jews accounted for everything by saying that Jehovah, God, was responsible, was the cause of everything that happened, the Greeks began to study this logically and rationally. They invented philosophy, they invented metaphysics, even prior to Socrates. There were a number of so-called metaphysical philosophers who said, one of them said it was, the world was made of fire, another said it was made of water, etc., etc. So that's the answer to this question. Are there any questions? Okay, so that takes care of this. Now I want to turn to today's narrative, which is about the Hellenistic period. And basically the Hellenistic period between about 323 and roughly 180. 180 would be the date in which the Romans begin to move in. The Roman period starts about 180 BC. So it's the Hellenistic. Hellenistic means Greek-like. In other words, it differentiates this period that I'm now talking about from the classical age of Greece, the 6th, the 5th, the 4th century. The Hellenistic age follows, the Greek-like age. Now, the 5th and 4th centuries, the wars which troubled Greece right through the whole period, based on the fact that there were these rival city-states. There was no overall political authority, so the Greeks spent their time fighting one another. And in fact, these wars, which got larger and larger, ultimately ruined classical Greek civilization. There was economic decline, so on. Attracts the notice of Philip of Macedon, who is king of Macedon to the north, north of Greece, part of the Balkans. There is Macedonia and there's Bulgaria, and that's the kingdom of Macedon in antiquity. And this is good agricultural land, and it grows a substantial surplus of grains and a large peasant population, good soldiers, large peasant population. It develops in Macedon. On top of them sit the king of Macedon and the warrior aristocracy. Now, these Macedonians, they pick up things from the Greeks. The Greeks are more developed. The Greeks think of these people as Hicks, underdeveloped, barbarians. But gradually, the Macedonians become more and more sophisticated, especially when it comes to war. And by the time of Philip of Macedon, Philip II of Macedon, the Macedonian war machine is very considerable. It has by far an army which eclipses any of the Greek city-states or even the Greek city-states combined. And this army, they have a very sophisticated infantry, heavily armed cavalry. They know how to conduct sieges against cities. And of course, the city-states are vulnerable. And in 359, Philip of Macedon invades and occupies northern and central Greece. The Athenians attempt to mobilize a general resistance against Macedonia, but to no avail. And so by 346, basically, Philip has taken over the whole of northern and central Greece, and the Athenians, as well as the other city-states, basically have to subordinate themselves to Philip. And so in 337, the League of Corinth is signed, which is a league directed against the hereditary enemy, Persia. Philip and the Greek city-states signed this accord, and they are going to continue the war. They're going to carry on war against Persia. This is we see that as a result of the Persian wars, the Greeks, their outlet, and in terms of trying to achieve some sort of unity, is always, let's go to war against Persia. That becomes the basic theme. We can always resolve our difficulties by attacking this external enemy. And we see this even today, frankly, with respect to the Americans. The Russians and the Chinese are the perennial enemies of the Americans. And they attempt to rally Canada and such like nations, which have historically had these ties, as a way of sort of trying to get the West to cohere, and in fact, to get the United States to cohere. We have this external enemy. It's Russia, it's China, and we need to oppose them. Let's forget our differences. This has been going on since the Greeks, this kind of tactic. So this was what was going on. Well, the thing is that Philip dies in 336, 1 year after the signing of the League of Corinth, and is succeeded by his son, Alexander the Great, considered, along with Napoleon, the greatest sort of military genius in history. Also very admired by Hitler. Hitler was a great fan of Alexander the Great. Just to sort of finish up with the Greek city-states, while Alexander sort of organized this vast army to invade the Persian Empire, at the end of Alexander's brief life, that is to say, he succeeds Philip in 336, and he dies in 322 after conquering the whole of the Persian Empire, the whole of both the Greek and the Eastern world, and creating a single Greek-dominated empire. In 332, when he dies unexpectedly in 322, the Athenians decide, well, this is a good time to rebel. So they try to regain their independence in 322. But the end of the story is that the Athenians are crushed. And this is really the end of the real independence of Athens as a city-state. It lives on. It's a center of culture, education, philosophy, art, but it no longer it's subordinated to the overall imperial structure that I'm going to describe. Now, meanwhile, before this happened, in 334, Alexander, at the head of an army of 40,000 men, soon reinforced by other volunteers in Greece, who are attracted by the opportunities that are being opened up by Alexander, conquest, pillage, all kinds of political opportunities. In any case, Alexander sets out, with his army of 40,000 initial Greek and Macedonian troops, he crosses the Bosporus, which is the strait that separates Europe from Asia. He crosses into what today is Turkey and begins the conquest of the Persian Empire. 334. And the first place I should try now to bring up he crosses right here. And he, first of all, moves into Asia Minor, or Turkey, round about here. And right about here is, the Persians had essentially gotten rid of it, a kingdom known as Lydia. And in the chief city of Lydia, there was in the palace something called the Gordian knot. The Gordian knot. You'll see it, the spelling in a minute. Oh, here it is. Right here. Which legend had it that if somebody could cut the Gordian knot, which was a sort of an intricate knot, a big piece of rope, all knotted up, and people had tried for years to unknit it, and it was said that the person who did this would rule Asia. So Alexander comes before the Gordian knot. He looks at it, takes out his sword, and slices it in half. Instead of trying to untie it, he slices it in half. He cuts the Gordian knot. So people say, if you have a problem and you resolve it, a difficult problem, you resolve it, you have cut the Gordian knot. You have cut it's an expression that is passed into all languages. Cutting the Gordian knot, resolving a difficult problem. In any case, he does that, and then he moves on, and at a place called Isis, he defeats he inflicts the first defeat on the Persian army, driving them out of Turkey, out of Asia Minor. He then sweeps southward. His army sweeps southward. He invades Syria, Lebanon, and Palestine, and drives out the Persians and installs basically occupation forces, and then he takes over Egypt. And so this is a huge success. It's said that the Persians, I should say this, the Persia at first, way back in the 6th century, was a formidable force. And they organized, based on decentralization, a formidable empire. But 2 centuries later, they seem extremely weak. And people say that the subordinated peoples were overtaxed. But also very important is the fact that they don't seem to have been able to effectively combat the Greeks. The Greeks and the Macedonians had developed such a war-making capacity, such a powerful army, that the Persians proved to be no match for these Greeks. As a matter of fact, it's remarked that throughout this period, after their defeat in the Persian War, the Persians actually began to employ more and more Greek mercenaries. They invited people warriors from Greece to join the Persian army. So the Persian army was itself infiltrated by Greek soldiers. That is part of the reality. And moreover, many Greeks continued to become mercenary soldiers because the Greek economy was quite weak. Greece had been weakened. And so one of the things the Greeks could do was fight. And so more and more young Greek men went seeking their fortunes in one army after another, including joining the Persian army. So this is all, and when Alexander comes in, more and more volunteers, there's nothing for them in Greece. So they join Alexander in this war of conquest. Greece is literally conquering the Persian Empire. That's what's really going on here. Now, in Egypt, the notable thing he did was to found the city after himself, he names it, Alexandria, established as a Greek city-state, Alexandria, which of course still exists. It's a seaport on the coast of Egypt. He does that, but also he visits various shrines, oracles, and the priests in Egypt say, well, you're so extraordinary, we're making you into one of our gods. They raise him to the level of a god, if you can believe it. And then following this descent into Egypt, he marches directly on Persia. And in 331, there is a battle, and the last Persian emperor, Darius, is killed in the battle, and Alexander declares himself his successor. But Alexander, his thirst for military conquest is unassuaged. And believe it or not, he marches into Afghanistan. It sounds like the American army. He marches into Afghanistan. He crosses the Himalayas into India, and he defeats a vast Hindu army, an alliance of Hindu princes, which were led by 200 war elephants. Alexander is able to defeat this army in northwest India near the Indus River. And finally realizes, hey, I better go back and organize my empire. And so that's what he does. He goes back to Mesopotamia. And now what I'm beginning to describe is the organization of Alexander's empire, which now embraces all this territory that we've been speaking about. His headquarters is at Babylon, and he died there in 323 BC. Now, first of all, why did he do all this? Why? What was the motive for this conquest? Well, in the first place, it was a search for glory. There's no doubt about it. These characters like Napoleon, Hitler, there's a kind of megalomania that's at work here. We have to, and certainly military conquest is very much part of the psyche of in Greece, and Alexander was educated by Aristotle, so he imbibed some of this. But also from Aristotle and others, he certainly had this idea that the Greeks should conquer the Persians. The idea this is the hereditary enemy and we're going to destroy them. He got that from Aristotle and others. So there is personal glory, and then this idea of a crusade of the Greeks, of the Hellenes against the Greeks. But as he went on and he came to a deeper knowledge of the East, and he realized that the world, he had changed the world forever, he gradually got the idea that what he was really doing was unifying the East and the West. That in his person, he was going to unify the whole of the known world, the Mediterranean world and the West, and the whole of the Middle East, including Egypt, would be unified in a single empire. Now notice this Greek Macedonian Empire, it takes the place of the Persian Empire. And the Persian accomplishment, way back in the 5th century, had to be unify Egypt and Mesopotamia, and as well as Anatolia. But now the ancient world takes another step towards unification with Alexander, who unifies the Greeks and the Middle Eastern world into a single empire. So now I'm listing some of the steps he took to unify this single area now into a single empire. First of all, I told you that many Greeks were now making their way in the wake of Alexander. They were invading the Middle East, but Alexander specifically founded 25 city-states, like Athens, like Corinth, like Thebes. He ordered the construction at strategic points in the Middle East of 25 cities modeled along the lines of the Greek city-states. That is to say, the classical Greek temples, the gymnasiums, the theaters, the baths, all of the accoutrements, all of the aspects of the Greek city-states were included in these states. And these were to serve, they were to demonstrate the superiority of Greek culture. And secondly, they were strategic strong points for the Greek occupation of the Middle East. But beyond that, there's no doubt this was a conquest. But at the same time, he began to invite Persian officials to join his government. He co-opted key Persian officials into his government. And taking this a step further, he announced that defeated elements of the Persian army would be joined to the armies of Alexander. They would be integrated into the Greek Macedonian army. There would be mixed regiments of Greek Macedonian troops and Persian troops. Furthermore, he took over the ceremonial of the Persian court, the Oriental forms, ceremonies, hierarchical organization based on the idea that the emperor was absolute. Indeed, he was godlike. Conceptions which are essentially foreign to the Greeks. He now restructures the court. He orientalizes the court, as we can say. Taking this yet a step further, he orders 9,000 of his soldiers to marry 9,000 Persian women. There is a huge marriage ceremony. This is the way people got married back then. 9,000 soldiers Greeks and Macedonian soldiers were married to Persian women. And this famous marriage was called the marriage of the East and the West. It mixed together the two groups by marriage. Families were united together in this way. So those are some of the key steps he took. He died. He had a son, but the son was young, and soon the generals in his army began to fight. And alas, a civil war broke out between the rival generals in Alexander's army. And this war, we come to accept this. This is what happened. It took 40 years until about 280. He dies in 322. It's only in 280 that the dust settles and a new order has emerged in the Middle East. Instead of a single empire, this was too big anyway, which is impossible. And so by 180, by 280, a new political order has finally emerged. And this is the political order of the Hellenistic age that we're talking about, from 280 on. There are three parts. There is the Greek part, the Greece proper and Ionia and the Greek islands. This is ruled by Macedonia. Athens is simply, Sparta is simply part of this kingdom of Macedonia. The second part is Egypt, and this is ruled by a general in Alexander's army by the name of Ptolemy Soter. And so we called this the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt. This is 280. It lasts a long time. It lasts until the final occupation of Egypt by the Romans in 30 BC. The last monarch, or the last head of an independent Egypt was the queen, the famous queen Cleopatra. Cleopatra was the last Ptolemaic monarch of Egypt. Romans extinguished it in 30 BC. So we have a Macedonian kingdom, we have a Ptolemaic kingdom, and the last and the biggest of these kingdoms is the Seleucid kingdom, the kingdom of the general Seleucus. Another one of Alexander's generals was named as Seleucus, so we call it the Seleucid kingdom. And its capital was Antioch, a city which still exists. They say it's quite beautiful and interesting. And so that's the way this third kingdom was established, and you can see it's vast. It includes Anatolia, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Persia, Afghanistan. They're all part of the Seleucid kingdom. And what we have is a kind of rough equilibrium between the Ptolemaic kingdom, Macedonian kingdom, and the Seleucid kingdom, a kind of equilibrium. You can see these are the attempt by Alexander to unify the whole of the quote unquote civilized world was premature. So it fell back into its parts. Egypt, historically independent, Mesopotamia, historically independent, and Greece. But what is true is this whole area was dominated by the Greeks. The Greeks were the dominant politically and militarily. The Greeks ruled. Tens, if not hundreds of thousands of Greeks moved into the Middle East and Egypt. They established replicas of the Greek city-states beyond the 25 cities. There were scores and scores of Greek cities all over the Middle East now. There was free trade. Yeah, there were three kingdoms, but free commercial life was allowed. And on this basis, the great achievement that we can say of the Hellenistic age was basically peace, because the Greeks had been at war forever. And now these three kingdoms bring the wars of the classical period to an end. And with the end of the wars and the freedom of commerce, the whole region, all three kingdoms, experience a certain prosperity. The Hellenistic age is characterized, especially at the beginning, by real economic growth, real economic recovery does occur. Of course, this is a class society. Most of the people are peasants or slaves, and they're benefiting from the peace, and maybe they're a little bit better off, but of course, nothing really changes for them. They just carry on as they have since the beginning of the Iron Age. It's just the same. But overall, the merchants, the political elites, the political and cultural elites are better off under the Hellenistic monarchies. We can say, first of all, that at a certain level, the Greek culture and the Greek language dominated. Even if you were had originally been a Persian, etc., an Egyptian, or what have you, if you wanted to play a role from a political, cultural point of view, you had to learn the Greek language and you had to become educated in Greece. It was the model, classical Greece, what I told you. That became the model. Education consisted of the Greek language, learning how to speak in public, so-called rhetoric, a knowledge of Greek literature, also attending the gymnasia, working out, if you can believe it, gymnasia, and an avid interest in sports and heroes. This is this sort of classical Greek culture now spread all over the Middle East, and the elites enthusiastically joined in. I would say the people who resisted most were the Jews. This is important. They didn't like this at all, especially the Pharisees and the Zealots and the Essenes, the lower classes amongst the Hebrews. They were extremely hostile to this, but the Jewish elites, they loved it. What we can say is, despite this adoption of the Greek way all over the region, nevertheless, the creativity of this period is a definite decline from the classical Greek period. We see this in philosophy, the quality of the philosophizing. There is philosophizing, but it's not up to the level of Plato or Aristotle. The theater, there still continue to be plays written, but they're not that good. They're mediocre compared to the classical period. And we can also see, even in the arts and in architecture, the sense of proportion, of balance, harmony, ideal forms disappears in the Hellenistic period. On the other hand, the the art, the sculpture, and we have paintings as well. There is instead of classical idealism, ideal human beings, men and women, there's an attempt to capture realistically as possible the way people actually looked. Their emotions are portrayed, even in the statues, their feelings. There's a new realism, I'm saying, a new attempt to capture real human feeling in the art of the Hellenistic period as compared to the classical period. And we can add that there were considerable advances in science, engineering, and monumental architecture during the Hellenistic period. A very important development occurred in Alexandria, where the Ptolemaic kings decided to collect all the known manuscripts on papyruses, on papyri, known, and put them in a library. At Alexander, a great library came into existence, and it said that this library had 500,000 volumes. We compare this to the 2 million volumes in the University of Manitoba Library, plus the infinite resources that are available, the ebooks that are available through the University of Manitoba system, which of course all universities of any note have access to. So, but we're talking about the ancient world. This was the largest collection of manuscripts. It was, I believe, destroyed either by the Christians or the Arabs, who didn't believe in rational learning in the early Middle Ages. But that was one thing, the library. And in the same city, an experimental laboratory, a big experimental laboratory called the museum. It's called the museum. It's really an experimental lab where a lot of scientists and mathematicians assembled. And there was a very considerable development of science during this period. I should note, for example, Archimedes, the study of statics in physics. He's the the first and very significant physicist. There's Euclid, who organizes, he organizes Greek geometry. Euclid. Remember, it started way back with Pythagoras. Well, there's a very significant development of geometry during this whole period. Euclid organizes. So you have Archimedes with statics, you have Euclid with geometry, and you even have one character, I won't even mention his name because it's too difficult, who actually at Alexandria was able, using geometry, to measure the diameter of the Earth. And basically, they, back in the Hellenistic period, they knew how large the Earth was. They knew its circumference way back in antiquity, in the Hellenistic period. Now, we still have a few minutes. Let me finish this out. This was in philosophy, they studied now right through the end of antiquity. It's Socrates, it's Plato, it's Aristotle. That's the basis of philosophical teaching. But nevertheless, in the Hellenistic period, two further philosophies come along. A philosopher by the name of Epicurus invents Epicureanism, and this stipulates that pleasure should be the goal of human existence. And what Epicurus meant by pleasure was essentially contentment. He didn't think eating maximum amount of McDonald's or endless orgies was the source of pleasure. No, contentment and an absence of pain is what you want to look for, says Epicurus. And then the rival philosophy was Zeno, who invented Stoicism. And Zeno says underlying reality is a fundamental rational order. Rational order pervades the earth and the whole of the universe. And in order to find peace and happiness, a human being should basically put themselves into harmony with this rational order. You seek happiness. Well, what's notable about these two fellows is that their philosophies are personal philosophies. They're personal philosophies. That's not true of Aristotle or Plato or Aristotle. They weren't teaching the secret of happiness. But in this period, there is a definite turn towards individualism. You can see this in the paintings. I said realistic painting or statuary. The same thing's true in philosophy. There is a turn towards personal satisfaction, individualism. In the face of a political structure which is gigantic, these giant kingdoms, bureaucratized, in which the individual counts for very little, what we find is a search for personal satisfaction. So you have these individual philosophies. The end, happy vacation, and I'll see you on the 22nd.